Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're looking at The Things You Can See Only When You Slow Down by Haemin Sunim. We all get caught up feeling overwhelmed these days, right? So we're diving into this book to see if maybe it can help us all see things a little more clearly when we slow down.
It's a book that feels very relevant now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not really a quick fix or anything, more like a shift in how we think about things.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sunim starts off talking about the busy mind. He asks, why am I so busy? And that just resonated with me so much. But then, instead of blaming the world, he turns it right back on us, saying, it's not the world that's actually busy, it's our minds making it feel that way.
That's deepy. I love that story he tells about the nun, the one who was overseeing this crazy construction project but still found peace. Really makes you think that how we see the world is just a reflection of what's going on inside.
Right. Like that analogy he uses about everyone appearing as Buddhas. To the Buddha, but as pigs, to a pig. I mean, that's a powerful image. Have you ever noticed that? How your mood changes how you see everything? Like when you're having a bad day and suddenly every little thing is a huge problem?
Oh, yeah, totally. It's wild how much our perception shapes reality. And when our minds are racing like that, we miss out on all the good stuff that's already there.
So, okay, our minds are creating this feeling of busyness. But how do we actually find rest? In a world that's constantly demanding our attention.
Well, Sunim has some really practical advice for that. He compares it to being on a packed subway. You can choose to be frustrated by it, right?
What?
Or you can just find it funny. It's about awareness being present and letting go of those negative emotions that grab hold of you.
I like those analogies he uses too. Like how you don't rip food off a pan before it's ready. Or pick at a wound before it's healed. He says it's the same with tough emotions. We need to give ourselves space to process them, not try to force them away.
What I find helpful is how he connects those everyday things to what's happening in our minds, Yeah. It's not about struggling, it's about letting things unfold naturally.
Exactly. Finding a gentler way to be with ourselves. And the book talks about how changing our perspective can help us be more content too.
Yeah.
Challenging the idea that things are inherently good or bad, saying it's all about how we see them.
Makes you think of the comparison trap, right? Sunim uses the example of comparing yourself to someone who has it worse, and how that can instantly change your outlook. It's not about ignoring your struggles, but seeing how your viewpoint can make all the difference.
It's true. And sometimes that's all we can do, right? Change how we look at a situation, when we can't actually change the situation itself.
Totally. It's a reminder that even when things are tough, we always have a choice in how we react.
Okay, let's talk about those strong negative emotions. Anger, hatred, jealousy. They can be so draining. How does Sunim suggest we deal with those?
Mindfulness is key, he says. Just being aware of those feelings is a huge first step. A lot of people are just consumed by them without even realizing it.
So awareness is the first step.
Yeah.
But then what? What do we do with those feelings once we see them?
He says don't try to suppress them or deny them because that usually makes them stronger. Instead, picture them like a pedestrian walking by. You notice them, but you don't engage.
You create that separation, that space between who you are and those passing emotions.
Exactly. And he even says that if you just observe those feelings for a few minutes, you might notice them starting to shift, their intensity fading away, like you're giving them space to dissipate.
Which ties in perfectly with that whole idea of slowing down, taking the time to actually look at what's happening inside us. Speaking of slowing down, the book also dives into information overload. We're bombarded with choices, opinions, distractions all the time. How do we deal with that?
Well, he gives a surprisingly simple solution. Get a good night's sleep. He says when you're overwhelmed or confused, sleep can help you sort things out subconsciously, like hitting the reset button.
Letting your mind declutter while you rest. It makes you think. How often do we just push through when we really need to rest?
Right. He even suggests thinking about things you're grateful for before bed, or times you helped someone. It sets a positive tone before you drift off.
I love that.
Yeah.
And he doesn't shy away from tougher topics either, like dealing with painful memories. What does he say about navigating those?
He says focus on the present moment. When you're really present, your thoughts quiet down, and so do those memories. It's not about erasing the past, but about choosing where you put your attention.
Which reminds me of his advice about finding meaning in your work, even when you don't love it. He says wake up a bit earlier and sit in silence. Thinking about how your work, even in small ways, might be helping others.
Connecting to that sense of purpose, right? Seeing the ripple effects of your actions. Even if you don't love your job, you can still find meaning in how you're contributing to something bigger.
And that leads into a fascinating discussion about success. What does it really mean to be successful?
The book challenges that typical definition, wealth, power, status. Sunim says, true success is living a life that aligns with your values, a life that brings you joy and fulfillment. He even tells a story about himself, feeling pressure to be like the Dalai Lama, but realizing his path was to be himself, to be Haemin Sunim.
Embracing your individuality and finding your own way to contribute to the world, not trying to fit into someone else's mold.
And he emphasizes that real success is often about collaboration, not competition. Those who climb over others to reach the top often fall when the tide turns. True success is sustainable. It's about lifting others as you rise.
Now let's talk about relationships. The book has a whole chapter on keeping those strong.
And it starts with a great question. How much do we invest in relationships compared to material things? He says good relationships are the foundation of a happy life, even more than a nice house or a fancy car.
I love that analogy he uses, the fireplace.
Right. Sitting too close, you get burned. Sitting too far away, you're left out in the cold. It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between closeness and space. And it takes effort to figure out that perfect distance.
Makes you think about your own relationships, right? Where do you draw those lines? And that story about County Magistrate Mayung really hits it home. He was so blinded by pride that he couldn't learn from anyone, always ended up in conflict. Is pride something we need to be more aware of in our own interactions?
Definitely something to think about. Humility is so powerful in building relationships. When you approach others with respect and a willingness to learn, conflicts are less likely to happen.
And that leads to another important point, understanding different perspectives. Even something as personal as religion, Sunim encourages us to see the value in diverse beliefs.
He tells this story about visiting a Christian community and being struck by the similarities between their practices and Buddhism. It made him realize that faith can have so many forms, and we can learn from each other's traditions.
Respecting those differences, right? Building bridges instead of walls. It makes me think about giving. What does the book say about generosity?
He talks about the true meaning of giving, and I love the story about his backpacking trip. He and his friend always tried to leave places a little better than they found them. It's a beautiful example of giving without expecting anything back, just a simple act of kindness to make the world a bit brighter.
It shows how small things can have a big impact. It ties into that idea of selfless giving, contributing to the well-being of others just because it feels good, not because you expect something in return.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be about material things either. It can be giving your time, your attention, your compassion. Remember that story about the woman with the soy mill?
Oh, yeah. Such a small gesture, but it meant so much.
Right. It reminds us that even the simplest acts of kindness can have a huge impact.
Before we finish up this part of our deep dive, I want to talk about one more thing that really stuck with me, the power of encouragement. That story about Buddha giving a prophecy to his disciples, saying they'd all reach enlightenment. Their faith in his words fueled their entire spiritual journey. It's amazing how belief can be so powerful.
It is. It shows that our words can have a profound effect on others. We can plant seeds of hope and possibility in the people around us.
Empowering others just by believing in them. And that connects to another important message. Finding your own path. Sunim talks about how people always told him, I hope you become a great teacher like the Dalai Lama. And while he admired him, he knew his path was to be himself, to be Haemin Sunim.
It's so important to remember that you don't have to follow in anyone else's footsteps. You can create your own path, guided by your own values and dreams.
And maybe that's part of what it means to slow down, to listen to that inner voice, and have the courage to follow your heart.
Yeah, it really is. And it makes me think about that concept of impermanence. How does Sunim tie that into everyday life?
He uses these great examples, like think about that pizza commercial you love. But after seeing it 10 times, you're kind of over it, right? Or how sitting in a comfy position feels great at first, but after a while, you just have to move. It's like he's showing us that nothing stays the same. Everything's always changing.
It is. So how do we actually apply that idea of impermanence? Sometimes it feels a bit abstract,
He says it helps us accept change and let go of expectations, the ones that cause so much suffering. When we embrace impermanence, we can actually find more joy in the moment, right? We appreciate things for what they are, knowing they won't last forever.
It's like really savoring those little joys, those beautiful moments, knowing they're precious because they're temporary.
Exactly. And understanding impermanence can lead to deeper spiritual growth, too. Speaking of which, I was really touched by that story about Buddha's prophecy. The one where he told his disciples they'd all reach enlightenment. Their belief in his words actually fueled their spiritual journey. It's amazing how powerful belief can be.
It really is. It shows how our words can impact others so much. We can literally inspire the people around us just by expressing our belief in them.
Like we can empower them just by saying, I believe in you. And it goes back to that idea of finding your own path, which is so important these days when we're constantly told how we should be living our lives.
Totally. It's about having the courage to follow your own heart, not letting other people's expectations define you.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about love. Sunim doesn't just focus on romantic love, but love in all its forms. What are some of the key takeaways there?
He talks about how important it is to give more than you receive, like that story about the monk on his backpacking trip, always trying to leave places better than he found them. Such a simple but profound act of love.
It really is. It's that idea of selfless giving, not expecting anything in return, contributing to the well-being of others just because it feels good.
Exactly. And remember that story about the woman who gave Sunim the warm soy milk?
Yeah, it was such a small thing, but it meant so much.
It shows us that grand gestures aren't always necessary. Sometimes those tiny acts of kindness are the ones that make the biggest difference.
This book is full of those little reminders, isn't it? About how to live a more meaningful life. It's not about huge changes, but shifting your perspective and noticing those small moments.
It is. And one of those small things that can make a big difference is gratitude. Sunim talks about how gratitude can shift our focus from what we lack to what we already have.
That's so important these days, right? When we're constantly being told to want more, it's easy to forget about all the good things we already have.
He suggests taking a moment each day to appreciate the little things. A warm cup of tea, a beautiful sunset, a kind word from a friend.
Those little joys are everywhere if we just take the time to see them.
Exactly. Speaking of paying attention, Sunim also emphasizes mindfulness at work.
Mindfulness at work, that can be tough. How do we do that?
He says find little ways to create pauses throughout the day, like taking a few deep breaths before a meeting, eating your lunch mindfully, or taking a quick walk outside to clear your head.
It's about bringing that same awareness to our work that we try to cultivate in our personal lives.
Exactly. And when you're more mindful at work, you're less likely to get swept up in the stress.
Which brings up another good question. How do we find meaning in our work? Even when it's challenging or we don't love it.
He suggests thinking about how your work, even in a small way, might be helping others, like a street cleaner. Their job might seem simple, but they're contributing to the health and beauty of the whole city.
It shows that any job, no matter how small, can have a positive impact.
He also says it's important to find meaning outside of work, too, whether it's volunteering, spending time with loved ones, or pursuing creative hobbies. Having something that gives you a sense of purpose outside of your job can make you feel more balanced.
And it's important to remember that your worth isn't tied to your job or how productive you are. You're so much more than that.
You are. Sunim reminds us that true value comes from compassion, kindness, and love. Those are the qualities that make you truly successful.
And those are the qualities that shine through when we slow down. We take the time to connect with ourselves and with others.
Exactly. And when you connect with yourself, you can tap into that deep sense of peace and wisdom that's always there.
That's a beautiful note to end on for this part of our deep dive. It is a beautiful note. And before we wrap up our deep dive into the things you can see only when you slow down, I wanted to touch on a few more things that really resonated with me. Like this idea that sometimes the best way to deal with those tough negative emotions is just to acknowledge them, without judgment.
He talks about that a lot with mindfulness, right? Instead of pushing those feelings away or pretending they're not there, we can learn to observe them with curiosity and compassion, almost like giving them space to breathe.
He compares it to watching clouds go by. They come and go. We don't need to cling to them or try to control them. Just observe and let them be.
It's such a powerful shift in perspective. Instead of being consumed by those emotions, you learn to relate to them differently, and that can take away some of their power.
It reminds me of something else he says about finding your own rhythm in life.
Yeah.
Instead of comparing yourself to everyone else and feeling like you're not doing enough, you can focus on finding a pace that feels right for you, that's sustainable and authentic.
That's such good advice, especially these days when everyone's so obsessed with being busy and productive. Sunim reminds us to slow down and listen to what we really need, what brings us joy, what drains our energy. When we pay attention to those things, we can start creating a life that's more in line with our values.
A life that feels good from the inside out, not just one that looks good on the outside.
Exactly. And that applies to our relationships, too. He talks about surrounding yourself with people who lift you up and support you. He says, when you're with the right people, you don't have to pretend to be someone else. or try too hard. You can just be yourself.
That's so true. It's about finding your tribe, those people who get you and appreciate you for who you are.
And then it makes you think about how you show love to those people. Sunim reminds us that love isn't just a feeling, it's an action. It's about showing the people you care about how much they mean to you.
I love that story about his mom packing him extra food for school. Even when he said he had enough, he didn't really get it until he became a parent himself. But those little acts of care, that's how she showed her love.
It's a beautiful reminder that sometimes the most powerful expressions of love are in those everyday moments, showing up for the people you care about, and the small things just as much as the big ones.
And being present in those moments, really slowing down and appreciating the time you have with the people who matter most.
It all circles back to that main theme of slowing down, doesn't it? It's not just about moving slower. It's about becoming more aware of everything, yourself, your relationships, the world around you.
It really is. It's about shifting from doing to being, from achieving to just experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're truly present, that's when you discover all the beauty and connection and wisdom that's always been there.
So to everyone listening, take some time today to slow down. Take a deep breath. And see what you discover when you shift your focus from the outside to the inside.
I love that. And remember what Haemin Sunim says. The things you can see only when you slow down are the things that make life worth living.